Hi everyone, welcome back to Demand Decoded. Dan and Phil here with you as usual. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about how to grow your organic traffic when everyone else's is declining. I think there's a lot of fear in marketing at the moment around organic traffic and all of these down signals we're seeing. The graphs are all very negative when it comes to organic traffic. There's a lot of panic around what do we do? Do we need to shift our strategies entirely? Do we need to look away from search and SEO to new, tactics and strategies? But I think hopefully we'll be able to reassure you today to bring you some more insight into how you can actually reverse that trend and grow your organic traffic whilst all of these other red signals are out in the market.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting and somewhat challenging time, and it's easy to sort of get pretty scared, really, about like the old ways ceasing to work at all. But there are opportunities within the change, and there are still ways that businesses can, adapt to what's going on in their buyers, journey, and adapt we must. But yeah, hopefully we'll be able to show people while you might be reading stories that say one thing, the opportunity for you might be slightly different, and there are ways to, capitalize on everything that's happening still.
Yeah, for sure. And whilst we've touched on this in previous episodes, I think we just should quickly loop back on the landscape of organic search traffic and why literally, most businesses' organic traffic is declining right now. And just to touch on why that is, obviously, the rise of AI overviews in Google is taking a huge heap of traffic. They had a Google algorithm change, which really focused on, it was like a new round of EEAT, but more focused on relevance, which really, really sucker punched a lot of businesses in like January time. The decline is like really visible from there till now. And you've got like buyer behavior shifts and content diversification, people looking elsewhere from search for that informational style content. So you've got all of these things which are just stacking up and layering over a period of time, but like more significantly and needs to have attention now. And yeah, I mean, organic traffic is suffering because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. When you take all three of those shifts, and combine them, they have pretty dramatic effects on, traffic levels. Predominantly in that SEO informational content space, though, and that's where the opportunity therefore lies, right? To sort of look at what remains, what you can do differently to tap into the opportunities that are there. But big businesses that had really exploited the opportunity in search had, for them, most of them had started creating content on a wide range of topics, getting further and further and further away from their core focus areas. And relevance seems to have been really hit by the algorithm updates, So businesses have seen loads of their content, which used to net them tons of traffic. And to some degree, all traffic is good traffic, because the more people find your site, the more people know your brand. Usually the more leads and inquiries you get, right there. Yeah. It's normally a good thing. That just got slashed. Suddenly an off-topic, post that would have generated you hundreds of visits a month before might get you none now, because it's not closely aligned to what Google knows you represent and what you are an authority for. So that's one thing. Then you add in the fact that AI overviews are doing a great job of responding to really informational queries, right? I mean, let's be honest, it's incredible. And now people who use search don't have to go to the pages to read the blog posts that explain the subjects that they're researching. They can get a snapshot from essentially multiple sources at once, and in many cases come away satisfied. Yeah. Another huge hit on organic traffic levels to that type of content. And buyer behavior is always on the move. It's never stationary, especially as marketers, master channels. We typically optimize channels, saturate channels, and we usually make them less valuable to buyers. And they become more monetized, and they become, less authentic and truthful. And that's been happening for some time. Long before the rise of AI, and certainly before these algorithm changes, buyer attention was moving to other places, other platforms where they could get truer, more authentic, unbiased content, social communities, channels like Slack, WhatsApp, etc. So yeah, three things together make for a bit of a whirlwind, or maybe a storm of change that has to be weathered.
This podcast is brought to you by Blend. We're a B2B website and demand generation agency. We work with ambitious businesses just like yours to create and execute effective demand generation strategies that drive pipeline for your business. We also recognize that your website is the most important asset you have in marketing. So we specialize in building scalable websites on HubSpot that convert the demand that you've created. If you want to find out more about our services and see real results that we've generated for businesses, visit blendb2b.com. Yeah. I'd definitely encourage anyone to go back and listen to our episode with Kyle Denhoff. Can't remember the number of the episode off the top of my head, but
Recent.
Yeah, we touched on it, didn't we? I don't think any B2B brand has been hit quite as hard as HubSpot.
It would appear they are the poster child for impact on this one.
Yeah, and we dug into it, right?
It was fascinating. And I mean, ultimately, who else exploited the opportunity that content and search presented better than HubSpot, right? And I think part of their success in navigating this is the fact that they had already kind of not exhausted, because they knew how to keep it going, but they had fully explored this area, and they were moving on to the next one before it even became a requirement, right? They talked about the hustle and their acquisition of the hustle as a strategy for reducing CAC, being known by more of their target audience earlier because of news that they come to digest. I don't think that was necessarily rooted in offsetting future drops in search traffic, but golly, it's helped them do so, and they're very, very fortunate to be in that position.
Yeah, and, like Kyle was saying, how they just have such a great understanding of their customer and their buyer.
They will have seen the early signs, don't get me wrong, and they will have known that change was coming, because they're very, very good at that, and they listen to buyer behavior, which we should all do, ultimately, and it's sad how often marketers spend most of their time doing anything but observing and listening to buyer behavior, but they do it all the time.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what's enabled them to kind of counteract this huge 80% in blog traffic. Not overall organic traffic, but blog traffic.
Right.
So, yeah, all I'd say is go back and give that one a listen, because it was great to have him on.
Absolutely.
All right. I think we should get into my first point on our agenda for this, which is really reframing your mindset when it comes to SEO, which I think a lot of marketers need to do, because the playbook used to be find the relevant terms in your industry, in your sector, find the ones with the highest volume, the lowest difficulty. Didn't matter really how super relevant they were or the specific intent of that keyword. If it was high volume, low difficulty, boom, go for it.
Yeah.
Get the traffic to your website, get your blue link, high in SERPs, and draw in as much traffic as possible. But as we're seeing now, search and AI overviews are taking more and more of those low intent, very informational, top of funnel keywords that, one, it's really hard to rank for those anyway because they're super high volume. Two, AI overviews are doing a really, really great job of giving an overview of that information for very broad keywords, because it's not specific information. They can cover it quite easily.
Yeah.
All of this makes it really hard to put a lot of effort into a piece of content for a super high volume keyword, very low intent, and see a lot of value.
Yeah, you might not get any return on that investment if you spend time and money creating that content. So it's hard to make a case for that approach any longer. And
that's where AI overviews are stealing a load of traffic.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you've got this thing to deal with there, which is the old playbook of sourcing the right keywords to go after isn't necessarily working now. And I think marketers really need to be shifting to a more intent, low volume based keyword strategy, which is super focused on intent and trying to actually find the keywords where AI literally cannot be present.
Yeah, can't answer the question, and therefore, thankfully, doesn't try to. You know, Google haven't tried to force AI into the queries where it doesn't make sense for the most part. And this is where the opportunities, while things are shifting, shrinking, changing, this is where the opportunities remain to potentially grow your traffic as opposed to see it decline. There's obviously, commercial terms are performing well in the sense that AI can't speak to them as easily, but there's also a niche within informational queries where an AI response doesn't do the job. And that's a really interesting seam of opportunity for content that you've been tapping into.
Yeah.
It's a sound strategy, because create a post on that topic, AI won't get retrained on it anytime soon anyway, can't answer the question currently. You have an opportunity to provide a really valuable piece of content to a sort of like to an audience who has a heightened interest, I think, because we're narrowing in on people who are really in market and really looking for solutions and topics that are associated to their pains, and therefore it's a relevant audience. And this content performs really well.
Yeah. Well, let's get specific, I think, on what we're actually doing. And first, I think we should touch on our conversation last week around our own like pillar pages and our like high volume, lower intent keywords, and what we're seeing on those pages, which for the most part is a decline in organic traffic. And that decline is really from like 2023 onwards. Some even like a little bit before that. And the decline even more like rapid coming into this year, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. It's natural to some extent that traffic to those pages will decline, because it takes real effort to sustain and maintain them anyway. And the value of that effort is being really adjusted by the AI changes that are taking place. So you can't justify it anymore. You can't justify creating the content that would sustain the position of those pillars, and the traffic is going away anyway. So you've got to move away from relying on those, like you say, informational pillar pages necessarily. I mean, look at your own data in every instance. You never know. You might have exceptions to that rule. But content like that is declining because it is typically based around those broad informational topics that are well addressed by AI, and you can't hope to retain that traffic going into the future.
Yeah, I do think us like historic brands that have always put effort into SEO and like good content ranked in search are probably seeing the hit slightly harder, because I shared a lot of screenshots with you, and newer customers of ours where we have created new content that some of it is quite high up the funnel, more informational keywords, are still benefiting from that new injection of traffic.
Yes, there are pockets of growth there, pockets of opportunity, but as a broad strategy, it doesn't carry the same efficacy that it once did. And to your point, it's like if you've been working on your SEO for some time, then you're probably prone to see these impacts across some of your content, which is a shame, but that's the reality. You can't change that. But unless you've been like massively creating content at scale, you've probably still got growth potential overall if you shift your strategy in line with the changes that are taking place, the buyer behavior changes, the AI changes, and the relevance changes. So like you said, if you can start to create informational content that is specifically targeted at potentially lower volume but relevant traffic terms, can't be answered by an AI overview well or at all, and is reflective of quite high intent amongst the people that find that content, you have an opportunity to make quite significant gains in traffic, relatively speaking. Maybe not the same volume gains as before, but impressive volume gains, and you can have a line that's going up against whilst everyone else is talking about the lines going down, which is quite a scary landscape to be in. And the reality is as well that approach is naturally better aligned to pipeline creation. So it's a win-win really, because this is the content that will produce high intent leads on your website and buyers in your pipeline, as opposed to the what's the best business card design content of 2020.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's get specific with some of the things that I've been testing out and playing around with and seeing a lot of good results when it comes to organic traffic. So like towards the end of last year, I was thinking about this shift in organic search and AI overviews, and like, oh my god, like it's going to steal all of our traffic. And I was looking at our content that was still performing really well and still growing month on month, year on year.
Right.
And a lot of it was all around examples. And more specifically, like examples in X year, like 2024, it would have been last year. I was like,
There you go.
that's really interesting. And I was kind of digging into those search results and like looking at all of the pages. And I was thinking, yeah, AI simply cannot replicate these pages. And the few blogs that I was looking at in particular was like the top best B2B website designs in 2024, HubSpot website designs, the best HubSpot website designs in 2024. And I was thinking, yeah, wow. So AI can't replicate this for a couple of reasons. Like one, because all of these websites were created after AI's data was trained.
Yes, exactly.
And AI's data model is trained based on text. But what I'm serving here are visual examples. And AI doesn't have a library or model of visuals to pull data from.
Yeah, it can't aggregate that information and present it in the format that's needed, or access information that's up to date in terms of when the search is happening in the year of the content. So, it's a double whammy there of, failure for AI really, which is our opportunity.
Yeah.
And so I think although that's obviously a very specific example to our business, there'll be examples like that in most industries where you can be ahead of the AI engine. Now, that may change, right? So OpenAI are establishing partnerships that let their sort of like their old language model, 2021 trained, access up-to-date information in certain categories and places, partnerships with Forbes and the like. But that's not widespread yet. And in specific verticals, industries where B2Bs are trying to grow, there's going to be plenty of opportunities like that. Yeah, the visits might not be thousands, they might be hundreds, but there'll be a lot better visits too.
Yeah, a couple of things in there. So like even if OpenAI starts using more up-to-date data in order to train on, it's still a benefit, like potentially long-term, because your brand will then be served in these.
Well, we all need to be thinking
content.
about how do we go about being cited in the AI overviews and engines of the future. And right now, that is mostly, looks a lot like PR, being written about by journalist outlets so that these models that can reference that material up to date can access it. But that's a shifting landscape too. And like you say, creating this content now that gets you organic search traffic now is a benefit because it's part of being found commercially later and being referenced, cited, and provided by AI engines in the future.
Yeah, it is. It's a good strategy, I think, to tap into for now. Like, try and find the keywords and the opportunities that AI simply cannot technologically create, because the model just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
There's a big opportunity there.
Yeah, it's interesting as well because when AI, gobbles up all the traffic to informational content, the question becomes, well, why create informational content as a business? And then that leads you to think, well, okay, in 10 years' time, what is AI going to reference in order to provide these answers? And is the whole thing going to come crashing down? Who knows? But in the meantime, this is a worthwhile endeavor in terms of creating content that you can basically call informational. It's about acquiring, traffic, from a variety of places in the purchase process, purchase journey. But it also performs the other job of supporting your commercial discoverability, your pipeline generation, so on. So you're not just creating content that you're throwing into the wind and letting AI, steal the traffic from.
Yeah.
It's serving your needs, AI's needs of the future. It's a really good way to, maximize your return on investment in content.
Yeah, and then when you think broadly about the other channels you can leverage here as well, because what we're seeing is that these blogs, these kind of example type blogs, which by the way, so many of them are now in our top performing pages for every single month. The intent shifts slightly further down with these pages, this type of content. So then when you get into things and start thinking about retargeting, all of a sudden you can start to layer in that content in your retargeting audience,
right.
which is slightly higher intent, would likely consume more of your content in the feed and be more encouraged to click through based on the kind of intent that they had on your website. And all of a sudden, these two things are working really well together. You're bringing sustained traffic to your website in new ways that AI can't yet replace. and retargeting them with more and more content, building more and more like memorable experiences with your brand. It's all a compounding effect.
Yeah, it's a content creation strategy that's more focused on conversion rate than pure traffic. And
Yeah.
actually, I'm all in favour of that, regardless of the landscape, because ultimately we all need pipeline, we all want customers, we don't need or want leads, and anything that increases the conversion rate, from, let's call it a lead into an opportunity, I'm a big fan of, because that's usually where the big gains are had and the big wins by businesses. It can take an awful lot of traffic to generate a number of leads that can produce a meaningful pipeline result. But this approach is very much aligned to improving conversion rate too. So I love it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm glad. So yeah, in terms of when it comes to SEO and like keyword strategy mindset, I think that's where things are changing, and you can no longer just load up Ahrefs or SEMrush and just plug in your category, find the highest volume keyword and go after that. You really need to start thinking deeper about what can I create that AI can't immediately gobble up.
Yep.
And what can bring the most value to my customer. Ideally, working your highest way to commercial, working your way down to commercial intent as fast as you can, and get that commercial traffic to your website.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we still think that internally linked content is a powerful means of improving commercial discoverability. And so I think businesses are wise to try to continue to create content, but you've got to come at it from a justifiable standpoint in terms of cost and reward. And I think that's one reason why businesses, although we might want them to continue to produce this type of content, they might also need to take new approaches to creating that content, to do so at a cost level that's sensible. So you might not, in all cases, start with the written word. You might generate that from some other piece of content that you've created as a sort of, well, what do you call it? As the seed for multiple different types of content that you create. Because ultimately, we can't really justify spending 5 or 8 hours crafting a blog post that will only ever be seen as a blog post anymore. So finding new ways of getting to that point at lower cost, I think, is really important.
Yeah, and that's our next point really, because we've kind of touched on how we get around AI overviews taking a lot of traffic, but now we're getting into the content diversification and buyer behavior changing and how you get around that too. And I think this is part of that, which is this new like content creation playbook, which I think, has been played for 4 or 5 years now, but is gonna just become more and more popular now and more required now to do what we need in terms of content and to diversify it as cost effectively as possible whilst like remaining effective.
Yeah.
And this is again something we spoke with Kyle about, because I think I remember asking him the question, like, is this the new playbook for content creation? And I think he was largely in agreement, which is all around starting with that long form piece of video where you've got a subject matter expert from your company talking about a particular topic. They're sharing their unique opinion on it. They've got, perhaps a particular take that's unique to your business. Then that can be repurposed in so many different ways, which solves all of these issues around content diversification, attention being distributed across different channels, and allows you to serve those quite well.
Yeah, it for a lot of marketers in a lot of different situations, it won't apply universally, of course, like starting with a long format piece of potentially quite conversational video is the ideal approach, because it gives you a jumping off point into so many forms of distribution. You've got your YouTube video and your podcast right there, almost with no work, minimal effort required to polish that up. But you can then use a variety of tools and techniques, AI included, to transform that video content into other formats, be it the written content for a blog post that AI can't steal the traffic from currently, be it a series of short video clips for consumption natively within social feeds where your buyers are hanging out, be it ads for the various layers of advertising that you're running, all across your go-to-market. You can take that piece of video and you convert it into things that you can use, and every time you do, you're increasing your return on that investment, which in many cases it can be pretty low anyway, right? Sitting here for 45 minutes, recording a conversation on a topic, aside from equipment and time, it's not a high cost activity. So this is a very efficient way to go about creating the things we need to grow not only organic traffic, but to grow our pipeline and our business and our brand awareness and our social reach and all the things that we as B2B marketers need to be growing all the time.
And the best thing about this new style playbook is that you're starting with a unique point of view from somebody inside of your company, whereas so much historic content is just based on research from other people's content and other people's point of views, really. But you're forcing your brand to have a unique take on something, which I really, really like. It might not be unique, I suppose, but most businesses will have a particular stance on a topic, which is great. And I mean, it's just, yeah, it is great because one video, like you say, can bring you a YouTube video, which might actually be like 5 YouTube videos when you break it down enough. You've got a podcast out of it, which you might then break down into like bite-sized podcast episodes. Who knows? You've got your short form video for like LinkedIn, YouTube Shorts. It could create ad content, like those short clips for ads, a newsletter with all of that information in, a LinkedIn newsletter potentially. Like you could have ran this as a LinkedIn Live, like all of this created from one piece of content.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned something that to me is really interesting, which is a point of view that is either wholly unique or subtly unique. Most businesses' point of view are somehow unique, is becoming a powerful differentiator. There is a surplus of written content on most subjects, and the vast majority of content that's online doesn't really stand out. We've all experienced that. We've stopped downloading ebooks because they were all so pathetically average. We've more or less stopped reading blog posts for a variety of reasons, not least AI. But it's all very average. And of course, that's AI's weakness to an extent too, right? When we ask AI to explore and summarize a topic, it's doing so based on the vast amount of written content that it has been trained on, which is in many ways average. And so this point of view, having a unique perspective on your category, your industry, your customers' challenge or pain, is a fantastic way to stand out from AI content, cut through the noise, and also create a real affinity with your ideal customer. Yeah. Because your ideal customer will usually be somebody who shares your point of view to some extent and, shares your outlook on the challenges. So this has become a really powerful element of brand and a great way to create effective content.
Yeah, for sure. And it forces the distribution in different ways. Because if you start with video, you have to distribute that video somewhere else that isn't a blog on your website.
Indeed. Yeah, you've got to find different channels and homes for it. And I think, I'll be the first to admit that creating video was an obstacle, right? It's a daunting obstacle, and I get that. But it's a Band-Aid that you got to rip it off quickly because once you get started, it becomes a hell of a lot easier, and the rewards are just so great. Because as marketers, we always want to see an impact from what we do. And while there are measurability challenges around a lot of what we recommend these days, a topic we'll get onto in an episode soon, this approach so often positively lifts pipeline and self-reported attribution mentions of the places you're putting this content and these messages. Nothing like hearing people say in their own words that video content has moved them, that social content from you has influenced them, that YouTube has been relevant to their journey, right? And it comes through quite quickly in a lot of cases and is proof that you can reach people, A, that can't be reached in the traditional channels anymore, and B, that you might have never thought you could reach because you weren't active on that platform.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned brand, and grow your brand, which I think is an interesting point that we should touch on, because organic traffic isn't just these informational and commercial keywords.
No.
It's people searching for your brand.
Yeah,
And
like navigational is there too.
Yeah.
And if you are successful, then growing both direct traffic searches for your brand name and organic search traffic for your brand name are great signs of positive success and progress.
And if you can increase your organic traffic by growing search and demand for your brand name, that's putting you in a much, much better position than just relying on like research orientated keywords where all of a sudden you're competing against 5 other vendors. If somebody's searching for your brand, you are already a preferred supplier in their mind. It's going to be a much less competitive process. Probably they're already sold into what you do. Like that buyer is going to be much more valuable to you probably throughout the process.
I think this is an interesting area that might warrant a deeper dive, but I personally am not sure yet that little citations and little like buttons and links within AI overviews are going to be terribly influential. I'm not sure that the brands that get mentioned there and referenced there are going to see, much in the way of brand awareness, mental availability. Like, I'm not sure that's what's going to happen. Like, it's great to be referenced and you'll get some traffic, but let's face it, not much. And I don't think it's a very prominent placement that's going to result in a huge amount of affinity being built, meaning that's going to happen much more before search now. Being active on social, being on YouTube, having your podcast listeners, etc. These are the things that are going to create brand affinity, brand awareness, mental availability, and then search is going to be used to search for your brand. And if you optimize for that, the traffic you get is going to be much higher quality and of more value to you, and your conversion rate to pipeline is going to be high. But I don't think that, optimizing for the AI engines to be cited is necessarily going to be a great way to build that brand awareness that results in an increase in branded traffic. So I wouldn't count on that.
I completely agree with that, but I don't think that's a new thing, actually. I think that not just organic, that search has never really been a place to build brand anyway. When like, because I've heard this multiple times that we need to run Google like paid search ads to build brand.
Oh, well, that's absolute nonsense. Yeah, completely.
I think there's value when your brand is seen again and again and again organically.
Yeah.
But I think there's more influence, and there always has been outside of search, that influence your likeliness to click on something.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there are some big spenders that would argue that we just don't know what's possible if you have enough budget. But I think in all of the cases I've seen with SMEs and businesses like approaching enterprise level, you could never spend enough to make that work. But being seen 6 or 7 times in organic results while a buyer researched a topic, that was effective. That did create brand awareness. Even if they didn't click those links, again, it wasn't necessarily critical that they followed through. But if your brand name was in those top 3 search results over and over and over, it had an impact. It had an effective, it had an effect of creating mental availability. But yeah, that's going to change, that's going to shift and go elsewhere, I think, in the future.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so obviously this episode is all about growing organic traffic when everyone else is declining. And hopefully we've covered off that it is still entirely possible to grow your organic traffic in a few different ways, in many different ways, actually, whilst everyone else is declining. And this could be through looking deeper into how to get around AI overviews, becoming more strategic around keyword choice and content creation in order to combat that, content diversification being a big one, and shifting your playbook and thinking around how you create that and how you distribute it.
Yep. So creating content that's really aimed at and targeted at the opportunities within search that still exist, and diversifying the content you create and the formats you create it in to grow branded search, be it through organic as well, are 2 ways that you can grow even while others are talking about seeing declines. As with all things, we shouldn't. It's scary to hear people talk about these plummeting results, but you got to look past those headlines and think critically. And even in shrinking markets, there are usually growers, people who continue to succeed by adapting and exploiting what remains. So yeah, very real opportunities that we're seeing work out, just fine. Thank you very much. So don't be scared that just because some big brands have told you organic search is over for them, you can't win still. But have an open mind, think critically, and look at what the opportunities really are, and go after them very intentionally.
Nice. Great point to end on. Okay, cool. Let's wrap it up there. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Demand Decoded. Drop us a follow and a 5-star rating if you did enjoy this episode. And we'll catch you next time.
See you next time.